It's midweek. Welcome to Business Incorporated, coming to you live from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. On the program today, Mugabe's woes wipe out billions of dollars from Zimbabwe's volatile stocks. Zambia's central bank cuts lending rate to 10.25%. Plus, South Africa eyes BRICS partners to build new $10 billion refinery. Let's get started now with the markets. And it was a green intraday trading for markets in Egypt and Nigeria, as both markets were looking up 0.02% and 0.71% at intraday. However, the story isn't the same for South African market, as the index dropped 0.61%. In Kenya, the index closed 2.09% up on Tuesday. And in the Middle East, most major Gulf stock markets are intraday, including Dubai. Although Emaar Development dropped in early trade as it began trading after Dubai's first big initial public offer of shares since 2014. Meanwhile, rising tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran over instability in Lebanon and the conflict in Yemen have increasingly worried investors. However, Dubai's index rose 1% at intraday as Emaar Properties, which had been falling in the days ahead of its unit's listing, rebounded 1.3%. Several other Gulf bourses were strong, recovering a little from several days of weakness. They were aided by rising global equity markets and oil prices. Saudi Arabia's index edged up 0.37% as petrochemical blue chip Saudi Basic Industries gained 0.5%. Qatar's index added 0.5% as drilling rig provider Gulf International Services, the most heavily traded stock, surged 4.2%. The Qatari market shrugged off news that international equity index complier MSCI may shift to using offshore foreign exchange rates to value Qatar's market because sanctions against Doha have made it more difficult for foreign investors to obtain real onshore. The index was up 0.18%. Abu Dhabi's index, however, fell 0.85% as telecommunications blue chip Etisalat retreated 1.2%. And in Europe, stocks hovered around the flat line in early trade as positive global momentum eased. Let's bring in my colleague in Frankfurt, Konrad Busen, to tell us more. Good afternoon, Konrad. Thank you very much for joining us this beautiful Wednesday.
Hello, Jimmy. Good to see you again and good to be back.
Right. Now, let's look at the global market rally. On Wall Street, both the Dow and the Nasdaq have reached new record highs in 2017, while stocks in Asia have breached their peaks. Now, Goldman Sachs says rational exuberance will drive the markets in 2018. What's your take?
Well, that's really interesting wording that the experts of Goldman Sachs are pulling out there. Rational exuberance. Of course, that is playing with words. It reminds everyone here of the words irrational exuberance that were once invented by Alan Greenspan, who was the Fed chairman, when he talked about potentially too high valuations on the markets. And later, Robert Shiller, the famous American economist, talked about irrational exuberance governing the equity markets. And that was shortly before the tech bubble burst at the beginning of the century. So, of course, talking about rational exuberance potentially driving up the equity markets in 2018 by Goldman Sachs, that makes everyone wonder whether Goldman Sachs, is concerned that what we're seeing at the moment on the equity markets might be a bubble. Another analyst wrote in his report that we might be in a bubble, but if this is a bubble, it's a very long-lasting one. All this, of course, is not exactly something to be too enthusiastic about, despite the record highs you mentioned of the Dow Jones Industrial Average and of the Nasdaq Index. Also, in Asia, the increase on the stock market was significant. The level there is the highest in a decade. Here in Frankfurt, as you said, the DAX is hovering around the flat line. It's slightly recovering from early losses at the moment. What's on the minds of people here is, of course, the difficult search for a government in Berlin. There's a lot of talk about fresh elections coming up. And also, it looks like some of the ghosts from the past might be coming back, haunting the markets. In Italy, not so big bank, but bank nevertheless, Banca Carige says that it doesn't have enough money for the next 12 months and that it was possible that the European Central Bank demand that Banca Carige come up with higher capital buffers. This piece of news alone caused the stock price of Banca Carige to plunge by nearly 50% today.
Well, Conrad, let's just hope that that bubble does not burst anytime soon, as Goldman says, rational exuberance. Let's look at the corporate news. Hewlett-Packard CEO Meg Whitman is departing while Skype is in trouble in China. Bring us up to speed on this and how the news is going down on the trading floor.
Well, the share price of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise here in Frankfurt trading is down 6% because of Meg Whitman leaving her post as CEO. Mrs. Whitman is really an outstanding person, an outstanding manager in the tech sector, not only because she's a woman, not only because she's said to own more than $3 billion US, but also because of what she did with Hewlett-Packard. The last earnings report she came up with for this company reported about a 73% increase of profits. Now, of course, many people out there wonder whether her successor might be able to come up at least with nearly as good numbers. And there are doubts that he will. Skype, the story there is that in China, Skype was taken off the app stores of Apple and also Android. This not only raises concerns for this particular service, Skype, but also for the way how the Chinese are treating foreign companies, because the fact that this app was taken off the app stores was induced by the authorities in China, who want more control of companies, especially when they are companies which do not origin in China itself.